Hello everyone and welcome back to this course on Excel for business analysts. We're still down in section 2 where we're talking about some of the basics of working with Excel before we move on to some of the more intermediate and advanced functions. So in the previous module we took a look at some of those basic functions that you really need to know and understand. And in this module, I want to just do a recap on the whole concept of absolute versus relative referencing, because this is an essential thing to understand when you're working in Excel. So I'm going to show this in the most basic way that I can think of. So we're still working in our worksheet that lists out the UK's largest companies. And what we're going to do in a moment is add a column and we're going to work out the corporation tax that's applied to profits for each of these companies. But before we get to that, I just want to run over the basics of what exactly is the difference between relative and absolute referencing. Now, you might be very used to working with relative and absolute referencing, but if you're not, and this is the first time you're coming across this or the first time that you've heard these terms, let me try and explain it to you. So what I'm going to do first of all is I'm just going to type in some numbers. Let's do 1 to 10, like so. And I can see I have some weird formatting. I'm going to remove bold from those numbers. Now, if I was going to construct some kind of formula, and let's keep this simple, let's say equals sum, whereby I take this number, so the number in cell H6, which in this case is 1, and I'm going to add 5 to that number and close the bracket. So when I hit enter, I would expect to get the answer of 6 because it's just doing 1 plus 5. Now, if I want to apply this same formula to the rest of these numbers, all I need to do here is grab my little autofill handle in the bottom right-hand corner, and I can either drag down or I can double click. And it's essentially going to copy that formula down for me. So you can see as we get further down here, if we do a visual check, 4 plus 5 is 9, 5 plus 5 is 10, so on and so forth. So I can see that that formula is in fact working. So what Excel is doing here is if I double click on one of these down here, you can see that as I've dragged that formula down, Excel has modified the cell reference because this time it's referencing cell H9. If I go to this one down here, it's referencing cell H13. And that is what we call relative referencing. So when you pull down, it will modify the cell reference to move down one cell. And that is the default style of referencing when you're working in Excel. Now, there are some occasions where relative referencing isn't going to work for you. And that is the example that I'm going to show you now. So let's go back to our sales table. This is pretty much exactly the same as where we left off in the last module. I still have all of my data in a table. Now, for this first example, I'm actually going to take my data out of this table. So an easy way to do that is just click in your table, go up to Table Design, and then in the Tools group, you have a Convert to Range option. And you can see it says, convert this table into a normal range of cells. So I'm going to say Convert to Range. I'm going to say, yes, I want to convert it to a normal range. And there we go. My data is no longer in a table. How do I know that? Well, when I'm clicked in the table, I no longer get that Table Design ribbon at the top. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a column, right click, insert, and I'm going to label this column, let's just say tax. And what I want to do is I want to work out what the tax is going to be on the profits when the corporation tax is 20%. And you can see I have 20% listed over here in cell K2. So this is a fairly simple calculation to do in Excel. All we need to do is say equals. I'm going to select cell D2 and then I'm going to multiply it by the corporation tax, which is 20% or cell K2. And I'm going to hit enter. And again, remember these figures are in billions. So that is essentially 20% of this figure just here. So what I might think to myself now is, okay, I've done the calculation. I'm going to double click to copy that all the way down. But it doesn't work. And that is because, as I mentioned, by default, Excel is going to try and use relative referencing. So you can see if we go to the second cell down, if I double click to take a look at that formula, take a look at what it's doing. It's doing D3, which is absolutely fine, but when it comes to what it's multiplying by, it's selected K3 because it's figured that we want to move down one cell. But in this instance, we don't. We always want the formula to refer to cell K2. And that is where we want to employ what we call absolute referencing. So I'm going to escape out of here and do a Control Z just to come back. And let's do our formula again, but this time let's use absolute referencing. So I'm going to say equals D2 multiplied by K2, but this time I'm going to make the row and the column absolute by pressing the F4 key. Now the F4 key essentially allows you to cycle through different versions of absolute referencing. So this one here with the dollar signs in front of both the row and column means it's going to lock both the row and column. If I press F4 again, I can see with this one it's only locking the row. This one it's locking the column, and then we're back to normal. So I want to lock to that particular cell. I want to lock both the row and the column, so I'm going to choose this one with the dollar signs in front of both, hit enter, and now when I copy down, double click, I get the correct results. And if I do a quick visual check, we'll just choose one randomly down here, double click. You can see there that where it's referring to D17, but it's also still referring to cell K2. So that is what we call absolute referencing. Now, some of those others that I cycled through where we just had the dollar sign in front of the row or just in front of the column, that is what we refer to as mixed referencing. And I'll be utilizing those throughout the balance of this course so you can see how those work. So absolute referencing, a really important thing to get your head around. So now that I have my tax and I have my profits, what I might want to do then is insert another column. Let's just give this a heading of profits, let's just say net, and I can then do a very simple calculation where I say equals profits minus tax, hit enter, and I get my result. And for this one I can copy down because I'm happy for these cell references to move down in each of those calculations. So hopefully that explains reasonably clearly the difference between relative and absolute referencing and how you can access them by pressing the F4 key and why it's an important concept for you to understand. That's it for this module and for this very short section on the basic concepts that you need to understand. In the next section, section 3, we're going to start to delve into some of the more intermediate functions that are super useful for you as a business analyst, and that is the lookup function. So please join me in the next section for that.